All right, so welcome everyone to the last GeoDAWG seminar of 2023. Today we'll be hearing a presentation from Victoriya Forsythe. Before we get into that, we have just a couple sort of things to share. So just as a reminder, if you're interested in getting updates about GeoDAWG, then feel free to visit the website and sign up for the mailing list if you aren't already on there. You can also see our list of upcoming speakers, and if you have any speaker suggestions or questions in general for the future, then you can also reach out to us through the website there as well. For 2024, we have several speakers already lined up, but we're just looking for a couple more. So if you're interested or know someone, then please reach out. Just a couple of quick rules of the road. Victoria's happy to take questions during the presentation. So if you have a question, just as you have it, feel free to raise your hand and we'll make sure that we have the question asked and answered as it comes up. Otherwise, please remain muted unless you're asking your question. But today we'll be hearing from Victoriya Forsythe. She's a research physicist at the U.S. Naval Research Laboratory, or NRL. With a very strong background in ionospheric observations, modeling, and data assimilation. And she also has a project hosted on the website. She is a physicist, where she shares inspirational stories of women in physics. So please check that out and share it with anyone that you think might be interested. And today she'll be telling us about recent tools for ionospheric data assimilation developed at NRL. So thanks, Victoriya, for joining us today, and feel free to get started with your slides.
Well, thank you very much for having me. Can you see my slides?
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay. Try sharing again.
We can see PowerPoint.
We can see it.
It's in the presenter view, though.
Yep. All right.
Okay, cool. Looks good.
Cool. So today I'll talk about 3 different projects that we recently developed at NRL. The first one calls PyIRI. It's not only the rewritten classical IRI into Python language, but also rethought process of how IRI operates. So then I'll talk about implementation of PyIRI, which calls PyIRTAM. IRTAM is an operational data assimilation model that produces 15 minutes coefficients for 4 ionospheric parameters. And I will talk how we applied the principles of PyIRI to make the usage of PyIRTAM better for the users. And the last but not the least, Anchor is the new data assimilation model, which is fully parameterized. And yeah, I'll introduce this model to you guys today. All right, so let's start with PyIRI. So classical IRI model, it describes the diurnal and global distribution of electron density, but it constructs electron density mainly using just 2 parameters. One parameter is NMF2, or the peak of the electron density profile, and where this peak is located, or the height of this peak. And IRI uses either CCIR coefficients or ORSI coefficients to obtain those 2 parameters. Those coefficients were derived in the 60s using mainly 2 of those works. One is Johnson-Gallant and another one is Jones and Graham. How they obtained those parameters? Well, they looked at the ionozone data. They recorded the monthly mean parameters as the function of time for each ionozone. So this is how it would look like. So the dots are the mean monthly parameters that one ionozone would measure. And then they tried to find the coefficients for the Fourier functions that would describe this diurnal distribution. So then they would do this for all of the ionozones around the globe. And then they found the coefficients for global functions to kind of connect all of those ionozones and to produce smooth global variation. As a result, for each month, they produced one text file of the coefficients that would be used to multiply with diurnal functions and global functions to produce the kind of global distribution, which is also a distribution in time. So when you download a classical IRI model, it would have 12 ASCII files, one for each month. And if you open one file, it would be like 4 columns of data of those coefficients. It's very hard to read and to understand what is what, unless you know the exact Fortran format of how to read this file. But anyways, inside is 2,858 numbers, which are the coefficients. Those numbers can be split into 2 arrays. One would have 1,976 elements, and that would be the coefficients for the distribution of critical frequency of F2 layer, and following by 882 numbers that would describe the variation of M3000 parameter, or its parameter that is related to HMF2. So I will further talk only about FOF2 as an example. Forget about HMF2 for now. So this 1,976 can be split further into an array of 13 elements by 76 by 2. In this array, 13 would represent the number of diurnal functions. 76 is number of global functions. And 2 is just minimum and maximum of the solar level activity, meaning that IRI only uses those min and max points, and everything else is integration between. Let's first look at the diurnal functions. So this 13 would have 13 coefficients. Coefficients for a regular Fourier series. So it's a combination of sines and cosines. This is the equation to kind of write it in mathematical term. But if you just write each function, it would look like this. For j equals 0, it will be 1. For j equal 1, it will be sine t, then cosine t, and then just 2t, 2t, 3t, 3t, and so on. So the higher the multiplication of t, the more packed this series are. Global functions. So we have 76 coefficients for global functions. These are not a spherical harmonic functions. So those are so-called surface wave functions. They are not as convenient as spherical harmonics. First of all, they're not orthogonal. So in case you want to update the coefficients, it's an additional pain in the neck because you first need to find the orthogonal functions, then update coefficients, then convert back. So anyways, those 76 functions would be the functions of that can be kind of split into 3 terms. One is sine of x, where this x is the modified deep angle or the information about your magnetic field. So essentially for each position, you would have a particular more deep. Then the next term is cosine of the latitude, and then cosine and sine of longitude. So, but the difficulty in those functions is that it also uses truncations, and you also need to know the exact truncation for each series to kind of form this collection of global functions and to apply them for these coefficients. But anyway, here's all of the 76 functions. If you look at the sum of them, sine x would look like this. So again, you just have this magnetic field information, and that's it. This one would look like this. So it's very similar to the spherical harmonics, plus the information where the geomagnetic equator is. And this is another example. All right, how classical IRI uses now this information. For each time and for each position on the globe, it would first find the modified deep angle, then it would open the CCIR file, record those coefficients, then in a kind of looping fashion, it would multiply the coefficient with the function and add it to the function multiplied by next coefficient, and so on cyclically. Then it would close CCIR file. Then it would further calculate for this particular time and this particular location, the FOF2. And then if you need to change your time or you need to change your location on the globe, this whole process would be repeated from the beginning. However, this one CCIR file contains information about the whole diurnal trend and the whole variation on the entire globe. So why do we do that in this cyclic manner? And that's basically how the PyIRI was invented, is a big word, but written. So what we do differently is we start with array of geographic positions. So we start with array of longitudes, array of latitudes. For these two arrays, we calculate the modified deep angle. Then we would evaluate all global functions for all of those locations. In the same time, we'll start with array of times. We would find all of the diurnal functions for this time array. Then we would open CCIR file once, record this in a matrix form, all of those coefficients, and then we would just multiply those three matrices together, and it would give us the same result as the classical IRI would. So let me talk a little bit more about how do we form those matrices. So the simple thing for the Fourier transform, instead of writing this thing as the sum of elements, we record each function and evaluate its value as this. Basically, your zero element will be 1, your first element will be sine of t0, and so on. So if you start with array of times for your day, for example, your data assimilation runs on 15-minute resolution. So your array of times would be 0, 0.25, 0.5, and so on, so on. So if this array of times would have nt elements, then we would pre-calculate our diurnal functions for this time array. And those pre-calculated functions would have then the size of nt and 13, because we have 13 functions. So we would do the same for the global functions. If we have the grid size of ng, then our result would be 76 functions by ng. Thus, we have our coefficient matrix, which is 13 by 76. We have our FG matrix, and we have our FT matrix. And by using just one calculation, which is the multiplication of those three functions, we would basically have this movie as a result. The result will be matrix of nt by ng, where nt is the number of times during the day, and ng is the grid size. So in comparison of how classical IRI does it, so to produce this result for 1 by 1 degrees resolution and 15 minutes time resolution, it would require 6 million times execution of IRI code. If to translate it to hours, if you use just kind of download your Fortran IRI code and without any modifications, it would require about 900 hours. And the same result can be obtained in just 3 seconds, but just by rethinking this process. We compared IRI with PyIRI, where IRI was run online using CCMC website. And so NMF2s, the F1, NMF1, and NME are all the same. The only difference is with your not classical, but standard setup of IRI, it would use Shubin's model for HMF2, but we use CCIR model for HMF2. It's kind of like, so they started with it and then they approve it to Shubin's version. So maybe in the future, PyIRI will add the Shubin's model. But anyway, so if you use CCIR model as a setting in your IRI, then you would have absolutely the same results. But again, the online version uses Shubin's model. This is why the HMF2s and HMF1 slightly different. So the code is available at GitHub. It's also available at PyPy. So if you just type pip install PyIRI, it will be automatically at your machine. We have very nice documentation with examples, how to use it, and so on. We have the paper under review, but it's already available online. It calls PyIRI Whole Globe Approach to the International Reference Ionospheric Modeling implemented in Python. So please use it. For data assimilation, since you all work with data assimilation, you can use PyIRI as the background. Plus, you can construct your ensemble of model runs really, really fast, because PyIRI constructs like 24 hours whole globe in just 3 or 5 seconds. So it will speed up your process significantly. So next, PyIRTAM. So again, IRTAM, Ivan Galkin is basically father of IRTAM model. It's operational model. Every 15 minutes, it would produce 4 coefficient files, which are in the same format as CCR or ERSI files. And they would represent the updated NMF2, HMF2, B0 and B1 parameters. And B0 and B1, they explain the thickness of the bottom side of F2 layer. So how do they do it? So again, they use gyro ionizant network. Same way as Jones and Gallup looked at the time series of ionizant data. So they would take one ionizant, plot the 24 hours of, let's say, NMF2. Then they would say, okay, our IRI at this location has this climatological trend, which is the green line, green dashed line. So they start with CCR coefficients. And they say, okay, how can we update those coefficients to match our actual data at this 15-minute chunk? And so they update coefficients and they produce this red line. And then they use some complicated method of combining all of those ionizant stations together, but it's kind of like optimal interpolation, even though they call it machine learning technique. But anyways, so they combine all of these modifications to coefficients to also get the modifications of the global functions that would smoothly connect all of the ionizant stations. What's different between IRTAM formalism and IRI formalism is this one additional term in the Fourier series, which is B0 times TD. This term represents this red line, which just expresses it represents basically the diurnal trend. Why they do it is because they want a smooth transition between day 1 and day 2, because IRTAM coefficients can be also used for the forecast. And okay, let me first explain that to you. So this TD is has the UT and TOV. TOV is a time of validity. It's basically this timestamp or the time that's in the name of the IRTAM file. But UT can go past the TOV, meaning if you want to run IRTAM in forecast mode, your UT can go further than your TOV, and then this the line or diagonal trend becomes important. So anyways, all good, right? But it still needs to use all of this old Fortran code to construct the density from those coefficients. And that's why it was kind of natural to apply PyIRI formalism to PyIRTAM. We didn't make PyIRTAM kind of a branch of PyIRI because it had to change the whole structure of the code since the coefficients are being updated every 15 minutes. So what we do is we run the PyIRI for the entire day of interest. Then for each 15 minutes, we construct those global maps of NMF2, HMF2, B0, and B1 using IRTAM coefficients. Then we would update the rest of the parameters from PyIRI, for example, HMF1, NMF1, and so on. Then we would construct 3D electron density, and then we would do that for the next 15-minute time frame. As a result, it takes only 15 seconds to process 1 day of IRTAM coefficients and to produce 3D electron density, which is also a pretty good speed. How can you use this in your data assimilation work? Well, you can use PyIRTAM as the background, especially if you have subscription and if you can download the IRTAM coefficients in real time. They will be very close to Ionozone data, so you basically don't need to ingest Ionozone data in your DA. You can use PyIRTAM, as I said before, in the forecast mode. You will have 24-hour forecast. You can construct ensemble of PyIRTAM runs. And I think, which is importantly, you can use PyIRTAM to model your covariance matrix, because it will be essentially data modified climatological model. All right, the next thing, anchor. So originally, this PyIRI model was developed for anchor, just because I tried to use IRI as the background, and it was too long to construct kind of global background, and like, okay, that needs to be rewritten. Okay, so but anchor now uses IRI as the background, PyIRI, but in the future it will use SEMIS3. Also in the future, I hope that Anchor will become operational model as a part of NEMA. NEMA now uses IDA4D as the data assimilator. So the goal of the ionospheric data assimilation is to specify the vertical and horizontal distribution of electron density. And for our particular purposes in Navy, we need a very accurate 3D density distribution, especially the vertical structure, because we then use this information for the ray tracing to establish the communication links and so on. So a classical data assimilation system, such as IDA4D, usually performs the data assimilation on 3-dimensional grid. What it means is that this is a typical IDA4D grid. So we would have about 1,000 horizontal grid points, and then each grid point would have about 150 vertical grid points that would describe the vertical structure of the ionosphere. And altogether, it would give you 159,000 cells. And imagine the covariance matrix then would be 159,000 by 159,000. And this explains the computational intensity. So right now, to run Ida4D, it takes about several minutes for one assimilation time step. Also, Ida4D has some known problems, meaning that sometimes, even though the vertical TC results looks great, because, okay, first of all, I should start that Ida4D ingests slant total electron content from ground-based GPS stations. And also, it also ingests radio occultation data in terms of the slant total electron content. And as a result, it produces nice distribution of vertical TEC. However, sometimes if you look inside, if you look at the vertical structure of your electron density, sometimes it can be unrealistic and unphysical, because in mathematical terms, this structure matches the data the best. But because Ida4D thinks about electron density as a collection of not really independent, but sort of independent vertical grid cells, it doesn't know where the HMF2 is, or that there should be one large ionospheric layer, which is the F2 layer. So it doesn't think in those terms about the vertical structure of the ionosphere. That's why sometimes those blue lines show very unrealistically looking profiles, even though they match the data well. And this is the big issue for us, because imagine if we get this result, it would just mess up basically our ray tracing algorithm. And this issue, however, can be avoided altogether if we think about data assimilation in terms of the parameters. And this is how Anchor was introduced. So instead of thinking about the vertical structure of electron density as the collection of points, we think about it as about parameters. So to describe the vertical structure of EDP, we need several parameters. We need 3 numbers that would explain the peaks of each layers, NMF2, NMF1, NME. Then we have 3 parameters that would explain the heights of those layers. Plus, each layer would have a thickness parameters that would explain the thickness of the top and the bottom side. So altogether, we have 6 by 6 plus 6, which is 12. Okay, 12 parameters. Some of those parameters can be fixed at the model values, or kind of like updated model values. But we can, the parameters that we need the most are NMF2, HMF2, the thickness of the top side of F2, of the bottom side of F2, and the NME. And other parameters can be either fixed at the model levels, for example, the thickness of E region. Well, we never have enough data to kind of find the thickness of E region. It would be great to have just NME right? But the thicknesses can be fixed. The same for the F1 layer. Its climatology is pretty well understood. And if it's just a function of your NMF2 and HMF2, we can find it pretty well. The important thing is that if we know the limits with which each of those parameters change, then it's impossible to obtain unrealistically or unphysically looking profile. And this is important because this will guarantee that the results will be suitable with ray tracing. For anchor, we chose different coordinate systems as IDA4D does things. So the diurnal variation of your NMF2 parameters looks like this on the top side. So basically, those two enhancements are moving throughout the day, well, as the Earth rotates, but on the map, it looks like they're moving. If we convert this into different system, which is a quasi-dipole latitude MLT, then the bottom side movie, why didn't it stop? Okay, go again. Okay, we just change the slides. Okay, then the diurnal variation would look like this. So each time frame is not much different from the previous time frame. And the ionosphere looks completely different in this coordinate system. First of all, we don't have this curvature of geomagnetic equator. It's pretty much straight line. And I believe that it's easier to find the current state of the ionosphere in this coordinate system. Also, just an interesting fact of how different the mean and sigma looks like in those two coordinate systems. So the mean of NMF2 in geographic coordinate systems look like this, just two kind of enhancements around the geomagnetic equator. Well, because your equatorial ionospheric anomaly kind of moves during the day, right? In MLT quasi-dipole latitude system, it looks completely different. Well, those two enhancements, first of all, they're always kind of centered at the noon time. And again, as you saw in the previous movie, the one time frame is not much different from the next time frame. And this is why the sigma of NMF2 looks completely different in those two systems. For the geographic one, you have kind of similar shape, right, as the mean, and it's very, very low. The sigma is very low in MLT quasi-dipole latitude system. We calculated the covariance for anchor also in this quasi-dipole latitude MLT system, and that's how the correlations for NMF2 looks like. So these contours show how the correlation coefficient drops if we move further away from this black dots. So black dots are the reference points. And again, what I like about that is that at noon, we have secondary peaks. So not only the correlations are high around the reference point, but also at the place where the geomagnetic field line kind of connects those conjugate points, we also have the secondary peak. But the secondary peak is not observed further away from this equatorial ionospheric anomaly. So this type of covariance we calculated for each day by using the difference between the mean of the model and each 15 minutes time step. So basically we run PyRI every 15 minutes of the day of interest. We find the mean of this day in this MLT system. Then we subtract this mean from each time frame, and then we find the correlations for each point on the globe. All right. So currently, Anchor can ingest two data types, ionization data and radio occultation data. And we massage the data intensively before we ingest it. So for the ionization data, we used artist solutions, which looks like the bottom side of electron density profile. So those thick, colorful lines show the result of artist software. So then what we do is we find those anchor points or ionospheric parameters by using least square fitting, and then we check if the reconstructed profile using those parameters, which is shown with white line, if it matches the original data, and it usually matches very well. Then we look at time series. For example, this is for each ionization, this is how. For one ionization, the NMF2 variation looks like. We then find Savitsky-Golay filter, those white boundaries. And if a point is outside of those boundaries, we exclude it and call it an outlier. For example, this point was excluded. Then we do pretty much the same for radio occultation data. We first find Abel inverted profile, then we find parameters that would match the profile. For example, this black line is the Abel inverted profile, and the white line, which is right on top of it, is our reconstructed profile. So we then collect those ionospheric parameters like NMF2, HMF2, NME. Well, in this case, we collected NMF1 as well. Okay. Then for the map of each parameter, we would ingest those anchor points as the point measurements. For example, if this is the background for NMF2, so the background comes from pi-RI, and then the color inside of the circles comes from the NMF2 derived from radio occultation data. So then we would use Kalman filter to ingest all of those points and to produce the analysis. And this would be the percent difference between analysis and the background. And we check basically that we start with wider distribution, and we, as a result, after assimilation, our distribution becomes narrow.
Victoria, just to jump in real quick. Joe has a question about how you locate the RO data.
Okay, how we locate it.
Yeah, so the question is that tangent point moves in latitude and longitude. So you have maybe, let's just say you have 10 degrees and like just assume the tangent point only moves due north. So you have 10 degrees spread in your latitude and longitude. You're using that whole profile to construct like that whole horizontal swath of information to construct your EDP and get your NMF2, HMF2, and all the other parameters. Now, where in that 10 degree swath do you say that that observation exists? So like when you put the dots on the, these plots up here, where do they go?
Okay, so it would go where the NMF2 was observed along your tangent points.
Cool.
But
okay, that's settled. That's good.
Yes, but remember this correlation plot. So you would have also about 10 degrees of the drop of information. So it usually is larger than the length of your tangent point. So if you project your tangent points on the map, it would look like a line around this NMF2 value. And because in Kalman filter, the information from this measured NMF2 would also drop using this covariance matrix, it would basically cover the length of your tangent point. Does it make sense? Sorry, I don't have the
No, that's great. So I think you're
Mhm.
basically saying that your covariance length is big enough that
Yes.
it doesn't really matter. Okay, yeah,
Mhm.
thanks.
Yep. I did try to ingest, let's say, the thickness of the top side as the mean along the tangent points. I did try that, but it didn't really change the results. So that's why I go with the easiest way. All right. So, but we don't have just one parameter, we have 5 parameters. So we combine all of those observations in one observational vector. So if your vector y would have NMF2s, HMF2s, and so on. So then we would combine all of our backgrounds in the same order. So your XB matrix would have also backgrounds of NMF2, HMF2, and so on. Then we construct one big covariance matrix between all of those parameters. Currently, by doing that, this covariance matrix can have information about cross correlations of the parameters. But at the current stage, I manually set those to zeros. It's a little bit complicated to describe why, but basically, the difference between model and the observations of the thicknesses is very large. And it also thinks that NMF2 should kind of match that difference, and it just complicates the results. So at the current stage, I assume no cross correlations between parameters, but in the future, I might add it. So anyways, this the Kalman filter is applied in the same time for all of the parameters, and that's how the results look like for just one time frame. We did the OSI study to kind of verify our algorithm. We simulated ionizant and radiocultation data using SEMI3 as the truth, and then we can use pi-array as the background. Then we compared to the known truth, and this is how the root mean square errors look like for, again, NMF2, NME, HMF2, B top, B bottom. So black line is the root mean square errors for the background. So it's how different the pi-array is to SEMI3. But if we ingest the data, if we assume that our forecast is the same as our background, so we don't propagate any information in time, then we would have this white line. But if we say that our forecast is equal to our analysis, or it's a little bit more complicated, like Gauss-Markov equation. So it will be forecast is equal to analysis multiplied by e to the negative dt over tau. So basically the influence of your analysis, how it drops, and then you add the difference between your next time frame with this dropped influence of analysis. Then we would have this red line. For NEMO purposes, we don't really need this forecast, because if anchor is a part of NEMO, then SEMI3 would take all of the work to basically propagate the information from one time step to the next one, because SEMI3 is a fully physics-based model. So we needed just the nowcast data assimilation. But anyways, this red line just shows that if we propagate information from one time step to the next one, the errors can be further reduced. This is just one example of how Anchor is better because of the parameterization than IDA4D, especially for the HMF2 parameter. So this wasn't the OSI study. This was, so we ingested only actual radio occultation data, and then we compare to the ionizant measurements. In this particular example, so since IDA4D ingests slant total electron content from radio occultation data and not the parameters, it does not really deviate the analysis in terms of HMF2 from the background. So this black dashed line is the semi-3 HMF2, and the blue line on top is the IDA4D analysis. So you see how it just does not deviate. Anchor, on the other hand, it uses the parameters from the data, and it deviates a lot from the background. So we started with the black dashed line, and this red line matches the ionizant data pretty well. Lots of things still need to be done. So currently we're working on ingestion of ground-based GPS data and UV radiance data. Then the big task would be the ingestion of oblique HF data. Further, we will use SEMI3 as the background. So for each time frame, SEMI3 will be parameterized, and the updates on those parameters will be made by Anchor, and then they would be pulled back into SEMI, the coupled models. We introduced Anchor to the community, so the paper was submitted. It's still under review, but you can access it online. It calls Anchor Global Parameterized Ionospheric Data Assimilation. That's all I had. Thank you very much. I hope you have some questions.
All right, thank you very much, Victoriya. Any questions?
I have. Thank you, Victoriya. Very nice work and nice talk. Thank you. So there are a few, and that's I agree with you that it's very nice that you pointed out that well, most of us use VTEC as a validation, and then in terms of vertical structure, and that's it's not the case. And then we actually, as a GeoDAWG workshop that happened in July, we had that actually as one of the things that we actually have to look into. Everybody should look into vertical structure. And then it's nice that you actually presented this parametric approach. And then I have a question that I'm just saying that's great. And then, but also I wonder, did you find that it's the parametric approach may work in a different way at the different latitudes? For example, at the high latitude, when things changes in the E region very fast, for example, it might be too stiff. And then you are thinking of moving toward using SAMI3 as a background, or basically you try to make it to full common filter, I guess. And that's or maybe not high latitude, no focus, but even the low latitude, maybe sometimes did you find sometimes like conditions that may actually be too stiff? Well, may not.
For high latitudes, definitely, and we will need to add the precipitation model. Mm-hmm. So at high latitudes, your regular E region model would not work. You would need to add kind of additional layer that would describe those precipitating ions. Mm-hmm. That needs to be done. Yes, definitely. But in terms of other regions, I think the parameterization is good enough, mm-hmm. Especially for the global data assimilation. Because with the global data assimilation, it's not like we're trying to, locate a plasma bubble, so some small scale structure. We just need an accurate global variation of electron density, which is still hard to produce. So for our purposes, parameterization doesn't work well.
Yeah, thank you for clarifying. Yeah, it's not like going after bubbles and stuff like that.
Yeah.
It's hard. Yeah, okay, nice work. One quick question, the covariance map, like that you have shown. One thing I really didn't understand is that I kind of expected that the structure to be more elongated in a longitudinal direction. And it looks to me more, you know, like it has a shape, but it looks circular. Is that, I don't know, maybe
I'm not sure if, okay, so I think that this elongation in this direction is when you derive your correlation in geographic coordinates. I think that's where it's coming from. But yeah, in MLT quasi-dipole latitude coordinates, that's how it looks like. Also, my plot was a little bit kind of squeezed, and maybe if you just extend it, it would look more circular rather than elliptic, elongated upward.
Okay.
I had another question about the covariance length, actually. So you said that you're using deviations from the daily mean. So in MLT space, you find one number for each position, and then you find a standard deviation, and you just, or you correlate the deviations from the mean from one point to every other point on the globe. Is that right? Okay. Thanks.
Yes, this is also a simplified approach. I mean, ideally we need the model errors. So the problem with that is, so those CCR coefficient and ERSI coefficients, which explain the diurnal and global variation of NMF2 and HMF2 very well. But in the 60s, they decided not to record the errors for those coefficients. So if only we'd have the upper-lower boundaries, we could use them instead to find those correlations, and that would be a more accurate way for data assimilation purposes. So that's future work as well.
I hear your model error is hard.
I guess I had a question. How are you planning on, I guess, assimilating the STEC data into this parameterized model?
Yeah, I can talk about that.
That's
So we will assimilate ground-based STEC and UV data converted to STEC. So in our group, Ken Diamond, he found a way to find the relations between UV data and STEC. So he would convert, say, gold data into, well, in this case, it's more like a VTEC, absolute VTEC. And the way we would ingest it then is, so it will be a separate layer of data assimilation. So first we would ingest, for each 15-minute time frames, we would first ingest radial occultation and ionization data, as I showed here. Then on top of that, we would ingest STEC, and we would assume that HMF2 and other parameters are staying fixed at the analysis, and only NMF2 can change. So by doing that, we would produce the corrections only on the NMF2 map, because your vertical sort of ground-based STEC, it doesn't really tell you how your HMF2 changes. It's an integral, right, in the vertical direction. So it's possible only to extract the NMF2 from it. So again, that will be like a correction of NMF2 map. Does that make sense?
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, if not, I guess we can wrap up for today. So thank you very much, Victoriya.
Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.
Yeah. And everyone have a very good AGU and break and New Year's coming up, and we'll see you all again in 2024. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Victoria. Thank you. Bye.